I'm Martha Wilson, 68 years old, standing alone at my husband Robert's grave as rain soaks through my black dress. 45 years of marriage, and in this final moment, our 3 children abandoned me. The betrayal cut deeper than the cold raindrops hitting my skin. I watched their cars disappear down the cemetery road while I remained, determined to honor the man who built everything for them. That day changed me forever. Before I share this heartbreaking journey, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and subscribe to join our community of real-life stories. Robert and I met in college in 1976. He was studying finance, and I was pursuing education. His quiet confidence caught my attention during a campus fundraiser, and within a year, we were inseparable. Our wedding was simple but beautiful, just like our love. We promised to stand by each other through everything life would throw our way. Little did I know how severely that promise would be tested decades later. When Robert landed his first job at a prestigious investment firm, we celebrated with a bottle of champagne in our tiny apartment. "This is just the beginning, Martha," he'd said, eyes bright with ambition and dreams. He was right. Over the years, Robert climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a senior investment manager handling multi-million-dollar portfolios. His clients trusted him implicitly because of his integrity and sharp mind. Our family grew alongside his career. Jessica arrived first in 1983, our beautiful firstborn with Robert's analytical mind and my stubborn determination. Timothy followed 3 years later, a quiet boy who watched everything with thoughtful eyes. When Stephanie completed our family in 1989, Robert joked that our home was now perfectly balanced with 3 children. I had once dreamed of becoming a school principal, but as Robert's career demanded more travel and longer hours, I chose to focus on raising our children. It wasn't a sacrifice that felt painful at the time. It was a choice made with love. I threw myself into motherhood, organizing school events, coaching soccer teams, and creating a warm, loving home. The children flourished under our care. Jessica graduated from an Ivy League university and entered corporate law. Timothy pursued engineering and secured a position at a tech company. Stephanie, our free spirit, became a marketing executive after several years of finding herself through travel. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American success story, hard-working parents with accomplished children. Robert's retirement 5 years ago gave us the chance to finally enjoy the fruits of our labor. We traveled to Europe, renovated our dream home, and spent precious time with friends. We had discussions about our legacy, updating our will to ensure our children would be well provided for. Robert had accumulated significant wealth through smart investments and a generous pension plan. "We worked hard to give them a head start in life," he would say as we finalized our estate planning. Then came the diagnosis 8 months ago. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The words fell like bombs in the sterile doctor's office. 6 months, maybe less, the oncologist said gently. Robert, ever practical, simply nodded and asked about treatment options, while I struggled to breathe. When we gathered our children to break the news, I witnessed what I thought was the strength of our family bond. Jessica immediately researched experimental treatments. Timothy took leave from work to accompany Robert to initial appointments. Stephanie moved back home temporarily to help with daily care. Their immediate rallying filled me with profound gratitude and hope. During those early weeks, our house was full of activity. Jessica coordinated with doctors, Timothy modified our home for Robert's comfort, and Stephanie prepared healthy meals following the nutritionist's guidelines. I allowed myself to believe that through this tragedy, our family ties were strengthening, that despite the impending loss, we would emerge more closely connected than ever. Robert faced his illness with dignity. "I've had a good life, Martha," he would tell me during our quiet moments. "I have no regrets except leaving you too soon." We spent hours reminiscing about our journey together, reviewing photo albums, and discussing hopes for our children's futures. Despite his deteriorating condition, he remained concerned about how I would manage after he was gone. As the months progressed, I began noticing subtle changes in our children's behavior. Their visits became shorter and less frequent. There were more excuses about work commitments and personal obligations. I made allowances, understanding that watching their father decline was painful, that perhaps they were processing grief in their own ways. Robert passed away peacefully in our home on a Tuesday morning in April. I was holding his hand, whispering our favorite memories as he took his final breaths. Jessica arrived 30 minutes after he passed. Timothy and Stephanie came that evening. They all cried and held me, and again I felt that surge of gratitude that they were there. The following days were a blur of funeral arrangements, accepting condolences, and trying to process my new reality. I worked with Robert's longtime friend and funeral director, Frank Matthews, to plan a service that would honor Robert's wishes for simplicity and dignity. When the weather forecast predicted rain for the burial day, Frank offered to reschedule, but I refused. Robert never let a little weather interfere with important matters, I said. Neither will I. The night before the funeral, our house was quiet. The children had opted to stay at a nearby hotel rather than in their childhood bedrooms. We don't want to overwhelm you, Mom, Jessica had explained. I spent that final night alone in our bedroom, clutching Robert's sweater and promising him that tomorrow would be a beautiful tribute to his life. The morning of the funeral arrived with gray skies and light drizzle. I was awake before dawn, my heart heavy but resolved to honor Robert with strength and grace. When my children arrived to pick me up, I noticed Jessica's immediate displeasure with the weather. "These are Louboutins," she complained, pointing to her red-soled black heels. "The rain is going to ruin them completely. Couldn't we have checked the forecast before setting the date?" I felt a stab of hurt at her concern over shoes on the day we were burying her father, but I remained silent, attributing her comment to grief manifesting in strange ways. Timothy arrived last, already engrossed in his smartphone. Throughout the drive to the church, his phone buzzed constantly. "Sorry, Mom. The Singapore office doesn't care that it's a funeral day here," he explained without looking up from the screen. When we arrived at the church, he paused in the car to finish an email before joining us. Stephanie, who had promised to arrive early to help me greet guests, texted that she was running late. "Traffic is awful. Start without me if needed." She slipped into the church 20 minutes after the service began. Her hair and makeup flawlessly done, smelling of fresh perfume rather than rainwater. As I took my place in the front pew, I expected my children to surround me, to form a protective barrier of family support. Instead, Jessica sat with her husband 3 rows behind me, citing better viewing angles. Timothy positioned himself near the side door, presumably for easy access to step out for calls. Stephanie sat with a group of her friends halfway back. I sat alone in the front row meant for immediate family, acutely aware of the empty space beside me where Robert should have been, and where my children chose not to be. During the eulogy delivered by Robert's brother, I overheard whispered conversations from the pews behind me. Jessica's distinctive voice carried forward. "Dad's investment portfolio should be substantial. The house alone must be worth over $1 million now." Later, as friends shared memories of Robert, I caught fragments of Timothy's hushed phone conversation. "Once the estate clears probate. Yes, I understand the opportunity is time-sensitive." At the conclusion of the church service, as people filed past to offer condolences, Stephanie approached with a friend. "Mom, is it okay if Claire rides with us to the cemetery? She's having car trouble." Before I could respond, they were already walking away, discussing weekend plans. The rain had intensified as we formed the procession to the cemetery. Dark clouds hung low, and the precipitation fell in heavy sheets against the car windows. Frank, who was driving me in the funeral home's limousine, offered reassurance. Robert was always practical. He'd understand if we kept the graveside service brief in this weather. "We'll proceed as planned," I insisted. "Robert deserves a proper goodbye." When we arrived at the cemetery, the staff had set up a small tent over the gravesite, but it offered minimal protection against the wind-driven rain. As I stepped from the car, I realized I had forgotten my umbrella in the rush of morning preparations. Frank quickly produced one for me, but the damage was already done. My hair and shoulders were soaked within seconds. I stood under the small tent, watching as other mourners hurried from their cars, huddled under umbrellas and raincoats. My children arrived separately. Jessica immediately expressed her dismay. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We're all going to catch pneumonia. The ground is basically mud now." Timothy checked his watch. "How long is this portion supposed to last? I have a conference call at 3. Stephanie shivered dramatically. My silk blouse is completely ruined. Can't we just do a quick prayer and finish this indoors somewhere? Your father's burial will proceed as we planned, I said firmly, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. He deserves our respect and patience, regardless of the weather. Jessica rolled her eyes, a gesture I hadn't seen since her teenage years. Dad's dead, Mom. He won't know the difference if we cut this short. You're being needlessly difficult. The word struck me like a physical blow. I stared at my daughter, unable to formulate a response to such callousness. Timothy sighed heavily. Look, we all love Dad, but Jessica's right. This is impractical. We're all standing in mud, the minister is getting soaked. Can't we be reasonable? Reasonable. I finally found my voice. Is it reasonable to rush your father's final farewell because of inconvenience? Stephanie stepped back, already turning toward the parking area. Mom, we're going to wait in our cars. Text us when it's over, and we can all meet at the house. Before I could protest further, all three of my children were walking away, heads bent against the rain, hurrying not toward their cars to wait as suggested, but directly to the cemetery exit. I watched in disbelief as Jessica's BMW, followed by Timothy's Audi and then Stephanie's Lexus, all purchased with generous early inheritance gifts from Robert, drove away from the cemetery while the minister continued the burial service. Frank stepped closer, holding his umbrella over me. The funeral director's face reflected shock and sympathy. Other mourners, colleagues of Robert's, our neighbors, distant family members, witnessed my abandonment with uncomfortable expressions of pity. Mrs. Wilson, we can postpone if you'd prefer, the minister offered gently. No, I said, straightening my spine. My husband waited for nothing and no one in life. I won't have him wait in death because of rain. And so I stood alone, soaked to the skin despite Frank's umbrella, as we committed Robert's body to the earth. I placed a single rose on his casket and whispered a private goodbye to the man who had been my entire adult life. The rain mingled with my tears until I couldn't distinguish between them. The drive home from the cemetery was silent except for the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers fighting against the downpour. Frank had offered to drive me, seeing my distress, and I gratefully accepted. My clothes clung uncomfortably to my body, my hair hung in wet strands, and my heart felt heavier than the dark clouds above. Martha, I've known you and Robert for 30 years, Frank said as we approached my neighborhood. What happened back there? It wasn't right. They're grieving, I offered weakly, still making excuses for my children's behavior. We all process loss differently. Frank's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. That wasn't grief. That was selfishness. When we arrived at my house, the beautiful colonial Robert and I had lovingly maintained for decades, I expected to find my children waiting. Instead, the driveway was empty, the house dark. No lights welcomed me home. No kettle boiled for tea. No children waited to comfort their widowed mother. Would you like me to come in? Help you get settled? Frank asked, concern evident in his voice. No, thank you. I need some time alone, I replied, though alone was the last thing I wanted to be. Inside, I peeled off my wet clothes and took a hot shower, letting the water warm my chilled body while my mind replayed the cemetery scene. I tried calling each child afterward. Jessica's phone went straight to voicemail. Timothy answered briefly, explaining he was in an important meeting and would call back later. Stephanie texted that she was dealing with emotional fallout and needed space. As evening settled in, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Robert's favorite chair. The house felt impossibly empty without his presence. For the first time since his diagnosis, I allowed myself to feel the crushing weight of being truly alone. My phone chimed with a notification. Perhaps one of the children checking on me? Instead, it was a social media alert. With trembling fingers, I opened the app and found myself staring at a photo posted by Jessica just 30 minutes earlier. She was at a high-end department store, smiling while trying on an expensive coat. The caption read, "Retail Therapy Day. Sometimes shopping is the best medicine." Disbelieving, I searched for Timothy's profile. He had checked in at an upscale bar downtown with colleagues, toasting with cocktails. Life goes on, closing the Peterson deal despite personal challenges. #dedicated #professional. Stephanie's Instagram showed her at a day spa, cucumber slices over her eyes. Self-care is essential during life's hardest moments. #blessed #self-care. My hand shook so badly that I dropped the phone. While I sat drenched and heartbroken at their father's grave, they had scattered to shopping sprees, business drinks, and spa treatments. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined possible. I moved to Robert's home office, a room I had avoided since his death. His presence lingered here, in the leather chair worn to the shape of his body, in the reading glasses still perched on his desk, in the faint scent of his cologne. I ran my fingers along his bookshelves, stopping at a leather-bound journal I hadn't seen before. The journal was dated from the start of his illness. With a pounding heart, I opened it and began to read Robert's private thoughts during his final months. "Martha continues to be my rock," one entry read. "I worry about her after I'm gone, especially given the children's behavior. They don't see what I see." Another entry was more direct. "Jessica asked about investment details again today. Not once did she ask how I was feeling or if I needed anything. When did money become more important than connection?" Several pages detailed his observations of Timothy. "Another family dinner missed because of work emergencies. Martha makes excuses for him, but I see the pattern. He shows up when it's convenient, when there might be discussions of inheritance or financial planning. About Stephanie," he wrote. "She's living in our guest room but is rarely home. When she is here, she's on her phone or asking for loans she never repays. Martha believes she moved home to help care for me, but I'm not seeing evidence of that intention." I read through tears as Robert documented concerns I had willfully ignored for years. He saw through the facade of our perfect family, while I remained blinded by maternal love and wishful thinking. The most painful entry came toward the end. "I've discussed my concerns with Harold, our attorney. Martha will have full discretion over the estate. I trust her judgment, though I fear she may not see our children clearly until I'm gone. When that clarity comes, as I believe it will, I hope she'll find the strength to make difficult decisions." The phone rang, startling me from my reading. It was Frank. "Martha, I'm checking to make sure you're all right. I couldn't stop thinking about today." "I found Robert's journal," I said, my voice hollow. "He saw it all, Frank. The selfishness, the entitlement, the lack of genuine care. He saw it while I refused to." Frank was quiet for a moment. Robert was an observant man, and he loved those kids fiercely, enough to worry about the people they were becoming. "They abandoned me at his grave, Frank. They left me standing alone in the rain while they went shopping and to spas and business meetings." My voice broke. What kind of children do that to their mother? To their father's memory? "The kind who have never faced consequences," Frank replied gently. "Martha, Robert and I had many conversations during his illness. He was concerned about how his money might affect the children. He worried they already valued the inheritance more than the man leaving it." This revelation opened a floodgate. I cried for hours after hanging up with Frank. For Robert, for the family I thought we had, for the painful clarity that now couldn't be ignored. My children had revealed their true character at the moment of my greatest vulnerability. And Robert, even in death, had given me the permission I needed to see the truth. The house remained silent the following day. No children called to check on their recently widowed mother. No one stopped by with food or comfort. The isolation was both painful and illuminating, like a spotlight revealing what had long existed in shadow. By mid-afternoon, I gathered enough strength to check my phone. Still no messages from my children, though dozens of friends and distant relatives had sent condolences and offers of support. The contrast was stark and heartbreaking. I scrolled through social media again, a form of emotional self-flagellation. Jessica had posted photos of her shopping haul. Timothy shared a business article he was quoted in, with no mention of his father's funeral the previous day. Stephanie had moved on from the spa to a wine tasting with friends, her caption reading, "Finding joy in small pleasures. #living my best life." Their online personas showed no evidence of grief, no indication that they had just buried their father. It was as if Robert's death and funeral were inconvenient events now happily behind them, while I sat surrounded by sympathy cards and funeral flowers, unable to imagine a future without my partner of 45 years. I returned to Robert's journal, reading entry after entry. His concerns about our children had grown more pronounced as his illness progressed. He documented conversations where they inquired about investment portfolios instead of his comfort. He noted visits that lasted just long enough to be considered dutiful before they rushed off to social engagements. He recorded promises made to help with his care that were broken with flimsy excuses. Most revealing were his observations about how they treated me. Martha spent 3 hours cooking Jessica's favorite meal for her birthday dinner. Jessica was 2 hours late, stayed 45 minutes, and didn't thank her mother once. Another entry. Timothy walked past Martha struggling with groceries to get to the liquor cabinet. When I pointed this out, he seemed genuinely confused about why this was problematic. The final pages contained Robert's deepest worries. I fear I've failed as a father. We gave them everything, good schools, nice homes, financial support whenever needed. Yet somewhere along the way, they learned to take rather than give, to expect rather than appreciate. My greatest regret is leaving Martha to deal with this alone. As evening fell, I made a decision that felt simultaneously heartbreaking and necessary. I removed my wedding photos from the mantel, our family portraits from the walls, and placed them all in Robert's office. I couldn't bear to see the smiling faces of children who had revealed themselves to be strangers to me. The doorbell rang at 8 o'clock. My heart leapt. Perhaps one of the children had finally come. Instead, I found Harold Davidson, Robert's attorney and our friend of many years, standing on the porch with a casserole dish. Eleanor thought you might need some dinner, he said, referring to his wife. And I thought you might need a friend. I invited him in, grateful for the company and the first real meal I'd had in days. As we sat at the kitchen table, Harold asked gently, "How are the children handling everything?" The question broke something in me. Between sobs, I related the entire story. The abandonment at the cemetery, the social media posts, the complete absence of support. I told him about Robert's journal, and the painful revelations it contained. Harold listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he reached for his briefcase. "Robert asked me to wait a few days after the funeral before discussing this with you, to give you time to grieve," he said, producing a folder. "But given what you've told me, I think he would want you to have this information now." The folder contained details of Robert's estate plan. While we had created wills years ago leaving everything equally to our 3 children, Robert had made significant changes during his illness, changes he had legal right to make as our assets were primarily from his earnings and investments. "He restructured everything to give you full discretionary power," Harold explained. "You can distribute the assets however you see fit, with no obligation to divide them equally, or to give the children anything at all." I stared at the documents in shock. Why wouldn't he tell me this? Harold's expression was sympathetic but direct. He said he wanted to give you the freedom to make decisions based on what you observed after he was gone, without feeling pressured by promises made during his life. He was concerned about entitlement issues. "He saw what I refused to see," I whispered. "Robert was an excellent judge of character," Harold replied. "It was what made him successful in business." As Harold prepared to leave, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Martha, Robert trusted your judgment above all others. Whatever you decide, he believed you would make the right choice." After he left, I returned to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and opened the bedside drawer where I kept a small photo of Robert and me on our wedding day. We looked so young, so full of hope and dreams for our future together. "They left me standing alone in the rain at your grave," I told his image, tears flowing freely. "Our children, Robert. The ones we sacrificed everything for. They couldn't even stay for 20 minutes to say goodbye to their father." For the first time since Robert's diagnosis, I allowed myself to feel anger alongside grief. Anger at my children for their betrayal. Anger at myself for enabling their self-centered behavior for decades. Anger at the unfairness of losing Robert while these painful truths emerged. I cried myself to sleep that night, clutching Robert's pillow that still held his scent. But somewhere in those hours of grief, a resolution began to form. Robert had given me not just permission but responsibility to address what our family had become. He trusted me to make difficult decisions based on truth rather than illusion. The next morning, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The children still hadn't called. No messages asked how I was coping. Their silence spoke volumes about their priorities and helped solidify the decision forming in my mind. I picked up the phone and called Harold. "I'd like to meet as soon as possible to discuss changes to the estate plan," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in days. Robert trusted me to make the right decisions. It's time I honored that trust. 3 days after the funeral, I still hadn't heard from any of my children. No calls, no visits, not even a text message asking how I was coping with my first days as a widow. Their silence was both painful and clarifying. The final evidence needed to confirm what Robert had seen and I had denied for too long. I tried reaching out one last time. Jessica's assistant informed me she was in meetings all day. Timothy texted that he was swamped with deadlines but would try to connect soon. Stephanie's phone went straight to voicemail, though her Instagram showed her at a beachside restaurant with friends. At 10 o'clock that morning, I arrived at Harold Davidson's office in downtown Boston. The familiar building where Robert had often met with his longtime friend and attorney now felt like a sanctuary of sorts, a place where painful truths could be acknowledged and necessary actions taken. Harold welcomed me with a warm hug. "Martha, how are you holding up?" "I'm finding strength I didn't know I had," I replied honestly. Necessity has a way of revealing our capabilities. In his spacious office overlooking the city Robert had loved, I placed his journal on Harold's desk. "I'd like you to read some of these entries. I need someone else to see what Robert saw." Harold read silently, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When he finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Robert shared some of these concerns with me, but seeing them documented like this, I understand now why he restructured the estate plan as he did. "Tell me exactly what options I have," I said, sitting straighter in my chair. For the next 2 hours, Harold explained the legal framework Robert had created. Unlike our original will that divided everything equally among our children, the new arrangement granted me complete discretion over the distribution of assets valued at approximately $12 million, including investments, retirement accounts, life insurance, and our fully paid home. "You have several options," Harold explained. "You could follow the original plan and divide everything equally. You could create trusts with specific conditions attached. You could reduce their inheritances and donate portions to charity. Or you could disinherit them completely. Legally, the decision is entirely yours. What would you do?" I asked, needing perspective from someone who had known both Robert and our children for decades. Harold was thoughtful before responding. "It's not my place to make this decision, Martha. But I will say this. Robert was concerned that inheritance without responsibility would further damage their character. He worried about enabling behavior that was already troubling him. They abandoned me at his grave, Harold," I said, my voice catching. "They left me standing alone in the rain to go shopping and to spas and business meetings. What does that say about who they've become?" "It says they've lost sight of what truly matters," he replied gently. "The question is whether a significant inheritance would help them find their way back, or push them further from it." I spent the rest of the day discussing options, reviewing financial details, and developing a new plan. By late afternoon, a framework had emerged that felt right, difficult but necessary, like setting a broken bone to enable proper healing. "Are you sure about this direction?" Harold asked as we reviewed the outline changes. "It's likely to cause significant family conflict." "I'm already alone, Harold," I replied with sad certainty. "They've made that clear. I have nothing left to lose except my integrity, and I won't sacrifice that by pretending their behavior is acceptable." As I prepared to leave, Harold shared one final thought. "Robert told me once that true parental love sometimes requires making unpopular decisions for the right reasons. He said it was the hardest part of being a father." "He was right," I said, gathering my purse and Robert's journal. "And now it's the hardest part of being a mother too." Over the next 2 weeks, I immersed myself in research and planning. I investigated charities focused on causes Robert had cared about, cancer research, educational opportunities for underprivileged children, and veteran support services. I consulted financial advisors about establishing trusts with specific purposes and conditions. I explored options for converting part of our large home into a community space for bereaved spouses. Throughout this period, Contact from my children remained minimal. Jessica called once, briefly mentioning she'd need her father's financial documents when things settled down. Timothy sent a text asking if I'd located Robert's watch collection yet, as he'd always understood these would come to him. Stephanie left a voicemail about helping me downsize to a smaller home when I was ready, though she never actually visited to check on my well-being. Their communications centered entirely around inheritance expectations and asset division, with no genuine inquiries about my emotional state or offers of support. Each interaction reinforced the painful reality Robert had documented and the necessity of the decisions I was making. 3 weeks after the funeral, Jessica finally suggested a family dinner at my house to discuss practical matters. The transparent purpose, to begin conversations about inheritance, was barely disguised beneath a veneer of familial concern. I agreed to the meeting, setting it for Saturday evening. Harold offered to be present as support, but I declined. "This is a conversation I need to have with my children alone," I told him. "Whatever happens, I need to face it directly." As I prepared a simple meal that Saturday, nothing elaborate like the special occasions when I'd spent days cooking their favorite dishes, I felt a strange calm. The path ahead was difficult but clear. Robert had entrusted me with this responsibility because he believed in my strength and judgment. I would not let him down. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. All 3 children arrived together, suggesting they had coordinated beforehand. Jessica carried an expensive bottle of wine. Timothy brought a bakery dessert. Stephanie clutched a small bouquet of flowers. The gestures might have seemed thoughtful to an outside observer, but I recognized them as perfunctory, props for the inheritance discussion they had come to initiate. "Mom, you look tired," Jessica said, air-kissing my cheek. "You should consider hiring help for the house. It's too much for you to manage alone." "The yard needs attention," Timothy observed, glancing around critically. "Dad always kept it immaculate. I can recommend a service." Stephanie wandered into the living room. "You should think about updating in here. A more modern look would help when you eventually sell." Not one of them asked how I was coping with my grief or offered genuine comfort. The absence of basic compassion was stunning in its completeness. Dinner was a strained affair. The children made superficial conversation, clearly building toward their real purpose. They discussed my options for the future, all of which conveniently involved liquidating assets or downsizing in ways that would accelerate their access to inheritance. Finally, as I served coffee, Jessica broached the subject directly. "Mom, we think it's time to discuss Dad's estate. We know this is difficult, but practical matters need attention." "What practical matters are most urgent?" I asked, my tone neutral. "Well, the investment portfolio needs management," Timothy interjected. "Dad always said I had a good head for finance. I could help transition those accounts." "And the house," Stephanie added. "It's way too big for just you. The market is excellent right now for sellers." "I see," I said quietly. "And what are your plans for your portions of the inheritance? I'm curious what your father's legacy will help you accomplish." They exchanged glances, apparently pleased with the direction of the conversation. "Tom and I have been looking at vacation properties in Nantucket," Jessica said, referring to her husband. "Nothing extravagant, just a summer place for the family." Timothy leaned forward eagerly. "I've been considering leaving corporate life to pursue private investment opportunities. This would give me the capital base to make that transition. I'd pay off my condo and maybe upgrade to something larger," Stephanie added. "And honestly, I could use a break from the corporate grind. Maybe take a year to travel and reset." I listened as they outlined plans that centered entirely around lifestyle enhancements and personal comfort. Not one mentioned charitable giving, community involvement, or honoring their father's memory through meaningful actions. "Thank you for sharing your plans," I said when they finished. "Now I'd like to share mine." I took a deep breath, gathering the strength I knew I would need for what came next. The children watched expectantly, likely anticipating discussions of asset division and distribution timelines. "I've spent these weeks since your father's death doing a great deal of thinking and planning," I began. "Robert trusted me to make the right decisions regarding his estate, and I intend to honor that trust." Jessica nodded encouragingly. "Of course, Mom. Dad always said you were the wisest person he knew. He did say that, I acknowledged. He also kept a journal during his illness that expressed deep concerns about the family we've become. Their expressions shifted subtly. Confusion mixed with the first flickers of unease. What kind of concerns? Timothy asked cautiously. He worried that the values we tried to instill, compassion, responsibility, gratitude, had been overshadowed by materialism and self-interest. I maintained steady eye contact as I continued. He was particularly troubled by how your behavior changed as his illness progressed. Stephanie laughed nervously. Dad was on serious medications. They can cause paranoia and confusion. He was remarkably lucid until the very end, I countered. And his observations align perfectly with my own recent experience. What experience? Jessica asked, her tone sharpening. 3 weeks ago, I stood alone at your father's grave in the pouring rain after you all drove away, I said, my voice steady despite the pain of the memory. While I remained to honor the man who built everything you now expect to inherit, you went shopping, to a spa, and to business drinks. Not one of you has called to check on me since. Not one has offered help or genuine support. Uncomfortable silence filled the room as the truth hung in the air between us. We've been processing our grief in our own ways, Timothy finally offered defensively. I understand grief takes different forms, I replied. But abandonment is not grief. Absence is not support. An inheritance without gratitude or responsibility is not a right. Jessica straightened, her lawyer instincts visibly engaging. What exactly are you saying, Mom? I'm saying that I've made decisions about Robert's estate that differ from what you might expect, I explained. With Harold's guidance, I've created a new distribution plan that better reflects your father's values and concerns. You can't just change Dad's will, Stephanie protested. We have rights. Actually, your father restructured everything before his death to give me full discretionary power, I corrected gently. Legally, these decisions are entirely mine to make. I outlined the plan I had developed. Each child would receive a modest trust of $100,000, accessible only for emergency medical needs or education expenses for their own children. The bulk of the estate would be divided between a newly established Robert Wilson Foundation for Cancer Research and a community center for bereaved spouses that would operate from our converted home. You're disinheriting us? Timothy asked incredulously. I'm redirecting your father's legacy toward purposes that honor his values, I clarified. The modest trusts ensure your children's education won't suffer. But beyond that, you'll continue building your lives with your own resources, just as your father and I did. Jessica's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. Dad would never have wanted this. He specifically restructured everything to give me this discretion because he trusted my judgment, I countered. And after watching you abandon me at his grave to go shopping for designer clothes, I believe my judgment is sound. You're punishing us for not standing in the rain? Stephanie's voice rose. That's insane. I'm responding to patterns of behavior that reveal character, I corrected. Your actions that day were merely the culmination of years of entitled, self-centered choices that your father documented with great sadness. Timothy stood abruptly. I'll contest this. We all will. You can certainly try, I acknowledged calmly. Harold has assured me the legal groundwork is solid, but you're welcome to spend your resources on litigation if you choose. How could you do this to us? Jessica demanded, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. We're your children. Yes, you are. And as your mother, I still hold hope that one day you'll understand there are more important things in life than inheritance and material comfort. I maintained my composure despite my breaking heart. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is allow natural consequences to teach what words cannot. What followed was 2 hours of emotional chaos. Accusations flew. I was mentally unstable with grief. I was vindictive. I had always favored Robert over them. I was destroying the family out of spite. They cycled through anger, manipulation, bargaining, and threats. Do you realize what this will do to your relationships with your grandchildren? Jessica demanded, weaponizing her children in a way that particularly wounded me. I hope you'll be wise enough not to poison those relationships, I replied. The trusts ensure their education, and my door will always remain open to them, regardless of your choices. By the time they stormed out, Stephanie in tears, Timothy seething, Jessica threatening legal retribution, I was emotionally exhausted but unshaken in my resolve. As the door slammed behind them, the house fell into a silence that felt different from the loneliness of previous weeks. This silence held purpose and integrity, painful though it was. I called Harold the next morning to inform him of the meeting's outcome. They reacted exactly as expected, I said. Jessica is already talking about contesting. Let her try, Harold replied confidently. Robert was meticulous about the legal framework. They won't succeed, though they may waste considerable money attempting it. I keep asking myself if I've done the right thing, I admitted. It feels right but hurts terribly. The right path often does, Harold said gently. Robert believed this might be necessary. He hoped it wouldn't be, but he prepared for the possibility because he trusted your judgment. Over the following days, the children's responses evolved along predictable lines. Jessica had her attorney send a threatening letter, which Harold calmly addressed. Timothy attempted to contact Robert's former financial institutions directly, only to discover his access had been formally terminated. Stephanie launched a social media campaign portraying herself as a victim of maternal cruelty, carefully omitting the cemetery abandonment from her narrative. None of them called to have a genuine conversation. None asked to understand my perspective or reflected on their own behavior. Their reactions only reinforced that the decision, though agonizing, was necessary. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I received a formal legal notice that Jessica was contesting the estate changes, claiming I was mentally compromised by grief and acting against Robert's true wishes. Harold assured me the challenge would fail, given the meticulous documentation and Robert's clear legal directives. They still don't understand this isn't about punishment, I told Harold sadly. It's about breaking a cycle that was damaging them as much as it hurt us. As spring turned to summer, I channeled my energy into establishing the foundation and community center. Working with Harold and a team of advisors, I created a mission statement for the Robert Wilson Foundation that captured my husband's compassion and integrity. The first research grants would be awarded to promising studies in pancreatic cancer treatment, perhaps helping future families avoid the pain we had endured. I also began renovations on our home's large east wing, converting it into a warm, welcoming space where newly widowed individuals could find support and community. The garden Robert had lovingly tended would become a peaceful retreat for those navigating grief. These projects gave purpose to days that might otherwise have been consumed by loneliness and hurt. While my children remained distant and hostile, I found unexpected connections forming with others who shared their stories of loss and rebuilding. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based solely on my own values rather than family expectations, and discovering strength I hadn't known I possessed. Jessica's legal challenge progressed slowly through initial filings, eventually reaching a preliminary hearing where the judge expressed skepticism about her claims. Your mother appears to be functioning at a high level, establishing a foundation and community center, he noted. Evidence of cognitive impairment seems notably absent. Timothy, meanwhile, faced his own reality check when his employer declined his request for a significant promotion. Without the anticipated inheritance to fall back on, he couldn't afford to walk away as he had threatened. The constraint of financial reality was precisely what Robert had believed our children needed to experience. Throughout this painful period, I kept the door open for reconciliation. Birthday cards were sent, holiday invitations extended, all met with silence or curt rejections. I accepted this as part of the process, hoping that time might eventually soften their perspective. 6 months after Robert's death, as I sat in what had been our bedroom reviewing foundation documents, my phone rang. It was Stephanie. My heart raced as I answered. "Mom," she said, her voice subdued. "I need to talk to you. In person. Just us." The following afternoon, I waited nervously in my living room for Stephanie's arrival. She had been the most emotional during our confrontation, and I had no idea what to expect from this meeting. I'd prepared myself for everything from another angry outburst to a manipulative attempt to change my mind. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find my youngest daughter looking different than I remembered. The polished, perfectly styled woman who had always prioritized appearances seemed diminished somehow. Her face was free of makeup, her clothes simple, her expression vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. "Come in," I said gently, stepping aside. Stephanie entered hesitantly, glancing around as if seeing the home with new eyes. "The place looks different. The renovations for the community center are underway," I explained. "The east wing is nearly complete." She nodded, following me to the living room where we sat facing each other. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until Stephanie finally spoke. "I got laid off 3 weeks ago," she said abruptly. "Budget cuts. My position was eliminated." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied sincerely. "That must be difficult." "It's been." She paused, searching for words. "Illuminating. I always thought I was invaluable there. Turns out I was just another expense on a spreadsheet." I waited, sensing there was more. "I would have been fine if..." She trailed off, then looked directly at me. "If things had gone as expected with Dad's estate. I had plans based on that assumption. Now I'm having to completely rethink everything." "And how has that process been?" I asked carefully. Tears welled in her eyes. "Terrifying. Humbling. Necessary." She wiped her cheeks. "I've been angry at you for months, Mom. So angry. But something happened last week that changed my perspective." Stephanie explained that she'd been going through old photos, looking for comfort in memories, when she found images from her college graduation. There was Dad, looking so proud despite being exhausted from working 60-hour weeks to pay my tuition. And you, who drove 3 hours each way every weekend for a month to help me prepare for finals. Her voice broke. "I built my entire life on your sacrifices, then couldn't even stand in the rain for 20 minutes to say goodbye to Dad." Her self-awareness took me by surprise. I reached for her hand, which she allowed. "I'm not here to ask you to change your mind about the inheritance," she continued. "I'm here to say I understand why you made that decision. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so deeply sorry for who I became and how I treated you both." The genuine remorse in her voice reached places in my heart that had been walled off by hurt. "Thank you for saying that," I whispered. "It means more than you know." We talked for hours that afternoon, more honestly than we had in years. Stephanie acknowledged the entitlement that had gradually corrupted her perspective on family relationships. I shared insights from Robert's journal, while also accepting my own role in enabling behaviors I should have addressed years earlier. "What will you do now?" I asked as evening approached. "Start over," she said with newfound determination. "Use my marketing skills for something meaningful instead of just climbing corporate ladders. Maybe even volunteer at Dad's foundation if that would be welcome." "It would be very welcome," I assured her. Stephanie's visit marked the beginning of a slow healing process. She began joining me for weekly dinners, gradually becoming involved with the community center project, offering her professional skills to help promote its services. Her genuine interest in honoring her father's memory through action, rather than words, demonstrated a maturity I had feared she might never develop. Timothy and Jessica remained distant, though in different ways. Timothy maintained minimal, formal contact, birthday calls, obligatory holiday acknowledgments, while focusing intensely on his career now that inheritance was no longer a safety net. Jessica's legal challenge continued half-heartedly, more from stubborn pride than genuine expectation of success. 1 year after Robert's death, I visited his grave on a surprisingly beautiful spring day. Unlike the torrential rain of his burial, sunshine warmed the cemetery and birds sang in nearby trees. I placed fresh flowers beside his headstone and sat on the small bench I'd had installed. "So much has changed this year," I told him, as I often did during these visits. "The foundation awarded its first research grants last month. The community center opens next week. I wish you could see how beautiful the renovation turned out." I told him about Stephanie's transformation, about the tentative rebuilding of our relationship. "She reminds me of the daughter we raised before success and materialism complicated everything. There's authenticity in her now that had been missing for years." A gentle breeze rustled the trees as I continued my one-sided conversation. "I won't pretend it's been easy, Robert. The hardest part has been accepting that some relationships may never heal. Jessica still believes I betrayed her, rather than understanding the deeper lessons you hoped they'd learn. Yet despite these ongoing pains, The year had brought unexpected gifts. The community center had connected me with a network of people navigating similar journeys of loss and rebuilding. I'd developed new friendships, discovered talents I hadn't known I possessed, and found purpose that extended beyond family roles. "You were right to trust me with these difficult decisions," I told Robert's headstone. "They cost me dearly in some ways, but the alternative would have cost our children something far more valuable than money: the opportunity to discover their own resilience and purpose." As I prepared to leave, I noticed a familiar figure approaching from the cemetery entrance. Stephanie, carrying her own bouquet of flowers. I waited as she placed them beside mine and stood quietly for a moment of private remembrance. "I thought I might find you here today," she said, joining me on the bench. 1 year. It's hard to believe. Some days it feels like yesterday, I admitted. Others, it seems like a lifetime ago. We sat in comfortable silence for a while before Stephanie spoke again. "I saw Jessica last week. She asked about you." This surprised me. What did she want to know? "If you were well. If you were lonely." Stephanie hesitated. "If you ever expressed regret about your decisions." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're building something meaningful from grief. That you have a growing community of friends. And that you've never once spoken of regret, only sadness that things reached this point." I considered this. "Do you think she's beginning to understand?" Stephanie shrugged. "Maybe." Her lawyer advised her to drop the case. "I think reality is slowly setting in." "And Timothy?" "Still Timothy. Work-obsessed, emotionally distant. But he asked for Dad's recipe for cioppino last month. Said he wanted to make it for his team. It's something, I suppose." As we walked back to our cars, Stephanie linked her arm through mine. A simple gesture of connection that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. "I've been thinking a lot about the difference between inheritance and legacy," she said thoughtfully. "Dad left us a legacy of integrity, work ethic, and compassion. I almost missed that by focusing on the inheritance." "It's never too late to claim your true inheritance," I told her. "That's what your father always believed." The following week, the Robert Wilson Community Center for Grief Support officially opened. As I cut the ribbon alongside Stephanie and Harold, I felt Robert's presence strongly, not in grief but in purpose. The center would provide a safe haven for people navigating the loneliest journey of their lives, offering both practical support and emotional connection. During the small reception afterward, Harold pulled me aside. "Robert would be so proud of what you've accomplished," he said warmly. "Not just this center, but the strength you've shown throughout this year." "I had no choice but to be strong," I replied. "We always have choices, Martha. You chose the harder path because it was the right one. That's the definition of integrity." As guests mingled around us, I reflected on the profound lessons of the past year. I had learned that true love sometimes requires difficult decisions, that enabling harmful patterns is not kindness but avoidance, that financial inheritance pales in comparison to the inheritance of values and character. Most importantly, I had discovered that even in our 70s we are still capable of growth, of finding new purpose, of rebuilding what has been broken, sometimes in ways we never could have imagined. The journey continues with uncertain outcomes. Jessica may eventually find her way back to authentic family connection, or she may not. Timothy might one day recognize the value of relationships over achievement, or he may remain caught in patterns established long ago. These possibilities rest in their hands now, not mine. What I know with certainty is that Robert and I raised our children with love, provided them every advantage, and ultimately gave them the most valuable gift of all: the opportunity to discover their own capacity for resilience and growth. Whether they embrace this gift remains their choice, just as my choices have been my own. As I look toward the future, I carry Robert's memory not as a weight of grief but as a foundation of strength. The rain that soaked me at his graveside washed away illusions and revealed painful truths, but it also nourished the seeds of new beginnings. What have you learned about family, inheritance, and difficult choices in your own life? Has there been a moment when doing the right thing meant making an unpopular decision? I'd love to hear your stories and perspectives in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join our community of shared experiences. And remember to share this video with someone who might be facing difficult family decisions of their own. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to make choices based on integrity rather than expectation, no matter how challenging the path may be.